Alright, there's a lot of us who buy a lot of gear and we're looking for a certain tone, something that we either hear an artist play live or on a recording, and we want to try and emulate that sort of sound. There's a few misconceptions about tone that I've learned over the years. Sometimes less is more, but sometimes the tone you want may be basically unreachable for a lot of us. And what I mean by that is a lot of the tone that, say, a guy like John Mayer will get, or even a dude like Mark Knopfler, a lot of that comes out of their hands. They can play their full rig at a show, and they might have a lot of effects, and you think, well, maybe if I buy the Voodoo Lab Sparkle Drive, I'll be able to sound more like John Mayer. It doesn't really work like that. What I've found is the tone John gets is great even when he's just straight into his amp. I've seen him play just by plugging into an amp. He's got no effects. You can see that the cable from his guitar is going straight into his two-rock. So a lot of the way he sounds is due to the way he plays. And if you're thinking, oh, no, that's bullshit, it absolutely isn't. I've got a few friends of mine who are like great guitar players. They're as good as you're going to find anywhere. I don't care where you go. Some of them are just amazing. And they'll take somebody's guitar and amp that they've just used that sounded very, very lackluster, and all of a sudden it comes alive. So they're playing exactly the same gear and it sounds awesome. So what does that mean? It means their playing is better. Not only is their playing better, but their ear for finding a tone that they know that works for them and that sounds good to them through experience will then sound good to everybody else. Now, a lot of it is also to do with just the settings of the amp. I think a lot of people don't know how their guitar should sound, so what they tend to do is they just they want lots of bass and nothing else, and that doesn't work. Or alternatively, they turn up the top so far that it's just irritating. So people who understand good tone through experience in live situations will be able to get a better sound than someone who's got, not even in their own gear, just to be able to play someone else's guitar and all of a sudden you'll hear the notes jumping out of the fretboard. It's a shock to people and they don't know why that's the case. For some people, they've got all the gear, they've got a $4,000 amp, they've got a row of pedals, they've got this, they've got that, but their tone sucks. And, they might like it. They might like their tone like that. But the funny thing is, when one of these players gets on their gear, it sounds 10 times better. And what did they do? They probably didn't even use half of the pedals. They probably didn't use any of the pedals. They might have chosen to use less preamp gain. They might have turned up more clean in their signal. It's a combination of things depending on the situation and depending on how the tone was before. A lot of the tone comes from experience in that live situation and knowing how you want it to sound. Trying to emulate somebody else's tone is next to the worst thing you can do. It's good to have a reference point on what you like. But if you're trying to copy, somebody else's tone, it's never going to work. Even if you know their licks, odds are it's not going to sound the same. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on for these players that we don't necessarily have access to. Like, they might be using different speakers or they might have had their amps tweaked in certain ways that makes them less stock. And, that's just going to be the case. So, I think before you go out looking for the Clapton tone or the John Mayer tone or this or that, you've got to be able to make an amp sound good. And you know the way that it works. Like, what I like to do every time I buy an amp, I like to play it live. I like to see if I can get my sound out of that amp. I want my notes to jump off the fretboard and into the crowd. You know what I mean? Like, I want it to sound like me playing, and that's how I want it to sound. And then what I'll do, I'll ask someone who's a much better guitar player than me, and I'll say, do you mind playing this? I want to hear how it sounds out the front. And that then will also give me an example of what the amp's capable of. More experienced musicians will be able to use your gear and get a better sound than you. And that's just the way that is. And it's not only the sound, like they might even have the same tone, but it's their attack and the way that they play that makes it much, much more effective to an audience. A lot of it's to do with chops. I mean, if you've got 50, 60, 100 licks in your bag versus someone that's not got really any licks, that just noodles around, then there's going to be, it doesn't really, there's no comparison there. Someone knows their stuff versus someone that doesn't know their stuff. And I think that's also true with the way amps work. You've got to run your amp that works for your guitar, your sound, what you're trying to do, and not try to live up to somebody else's tone, or be happy with your own sound and make it suit your playing and style of music. And that's the biggest thing. And another part about this tone chasing thing is, there's so many overdrive pedals out there. There's like 1 million overdrive pedals, and they're basically all the same. I mean, a lot of them are, they might have an extra knob here, a boost or whatever there, but essentially they're going to do the same thing. So, I got plenty of videos on YouTube with examples of this. Everything from, the Behringer gear to the Delta Lab gear to the Voodoo Lab stuff to the Boss, to the Bayang, to the full tone gear. And essentially, like, what these pedals do is very, very similar. And also stuff like the classics, like the Ibanez Tube Screamer. You don't need to spend a lot of money to get that sort of sound, but it's the way you use that sound in combination with your amp and the sound you're going for. If you don't have in your head the sound you want when you plug into your amp, then you got to basically stop and question, like, what do I want? I'd absolutely hate to walk up to an amp with a guitar in my hand, plug in and go, well, I don't know what sort of sound I want, so hopefully it sounds good where it is. Like, that'd be the last thing going through my mind when I play. It might take me a song to tweak it to get the sound I want. But if I ever did a gig and I plugged into an amp and I didn't know what I was going to get or expect at whatever volume I was playing at, then I'd play like crap. I wouldn't enjoy myself. And knowing what I'm like, I'd go home and I'd just fiddle with that amp until I knew how I could get it to sound at any volume. And I think that's one thing a lot of people aren't doing there. They'll buy their gear because of, they might want a new amp or they might want a new guitar, but their tone will still suck. And, there's guys that have been playing, 10 or 15 years that they'll walk in with a new Axe or a different amp, and it won't really help their sound. It still sounds the same. So there's got to be something there that's telling everybody, like, you might have just bought a $2,000, Fender combo, but it's not really helping your sound. So something's got to give. Like, what's the problem here? So, it actually does come down to the player, the technique, and, the ability to dig into your notes to get the sound that you want. Now, a lot of people, they think volume is going to save the day, when in the end, if they had their amp on half the volume and dug in, it would actually sound better. And, there's only so far you can come in guitar playing, I think, and tone with a lackluster attack. I've seen that many times too, where a player will basically just have shit sort of dig in his playing, and then someone else will use his gear and it's just amazing. Like, the difference in the tone, the sound, the volume, even at the same volume, everything sounds better and sharper and clearer and warmer, and it's just got all the good sounds and nothing has changed. So I think if you're unhappy with your tone, try to work out what sort of sound you want and take it from there. Effects aren't going to save the day in the end. I mean, effects are cool. I like using them, but I use them in some sort of context, like I'll use an overdrive pedal when I can't take my volume or sustain any further from my amp, or I'll use a preamp boost, which just saturates the sound just that little bit more. or you can use a delay to give you a bit of ambience, but none of these are going to sound any good if you don't have the fundamentals of good playing. And people get scared to change their technique after so many years. Like, they might have one good day and then they'll have 3 bad days, and they don't know why. The reason is, to become consistent, you need to have the fundamentals of attack down. I think that's one of the key steps to making your guitar actually sound good. Doesn't matter what guitar you have. If you're digging in and you understand the kind of sound that you're going to get out of that guitar and the kind of sound that you want from that guitar from your amp, and you know how to work both of those things, that's the secret. Now, what I'm not saying is not to use your guitar heroes or friends as a reference point for tone, because if you like what you hear, then they're doing something right. By all means, if you like Clapton's 335 tone from, say, Hyde Park, and you want to get your guitar to sound like that, use that as a reference. Try to fiddle with your amp until you can get that sort of sound. But also, more so than that, try to capture the feel of his licks, or try to attack the guitar and play softer in certain parts, or try to use sustain and things that are going on more so than just the gear to get that sound. So focus on licks. And if you don't have someone that you aspire to sound like in any way, tonally, then you're pretty much up shit creek. I think if you're a guitar player, most musicians in general will have heroes. And if you can't really decide on someone that you like enough to sort of want to push you to play better or play guitar like that person or in that vein, then you're pretty much screwed, especially with blues. Like, I don't know anybody that you can't hear other people's reference licks or tonal ideas. If they're good players, I can pick who they listen to, but they still play like themselves, and that's just the way music's been forever. So pick some players, pick some tonal ideas, work on it, but don't expect your tone to be exactly the same, because there's a lot more in their playing than what you may realize. Cheers.